That night, as the moon cast its silvery glow over the small, quiet community in Lagos, Azuka and her daughter, Ima, prepared for bed. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, a strange energy that seemed to linger between them. Ima, a young woman on the cusp of adulthood, had always been close to her mother, closer than most daughters ever were. Their bond was one forged in the absence of a father, a bond that Azuka had nurtured with a mix of love and manipulation. As Ima lay in bed, her mind began to drift, but soon, a peculiar sensation stirred within her. It started as a faint, sweet tickle in her most sacred area, a sensation that was both unfamiliar and strangely pleasurable. Her eyes fluttered open, and to her shock, she saw her mother's hand gently caressing her body. Ima's heart raced, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Mama, what are you doing? Why are you touching me like this?" Azuka's eyes, dark and filled with a mix of longing and desperation, met her daughter's. "My child," she began, her voice soft but laden with emotion, "ever since your father left us, I have been alone. A woman has needs, desires that cannot be ignored. I have tried to keep myself pure, to live as a woman should, but it has not been easy. You are my everything, Ima. You are my life, my heart. And now, you are the only one who can fill the void he left behind." Ima's mind swirled with confusion. Her mother's words clashed with everything she had been taught. Azuka had always preached that a woman's body was sacred, that it should be kept untouched, reserved only for oneself. She had warned Ima about men, painting them as selfish, dangerous creatures who sought only to take and never to give. But now, her mother's hands told a different story, one that Ima could not fully comprehend. "But Mama," Ima stammered, her voice barely above a whisper, "you always told me to keep my body for myself. You said intimacy was for the weak, for those without ambition. How can you say my body belongs to you now?" Azuka's expression softened, her fingers brushing a strand of hair from Ima's face. "You are my exception, my darling. What we share is pure, untainted by the filth of the world. I would never deceive you, Ima. Trust me, as you always have." That night, the line between mother and daughter blurred in ways that defied nature and morality. What began as a tentative exploration soon became a nightly ritual, a secret shared in the darkness of their home. Ima, once innocent and unsure, began to crave the forbidden connection she shared with her mother. Her feelings grew twisted, unnatural, as she found herself yearning for the touch that only Azuka could provide. But the fragile world they had built began to crack one fateful afternoon. Ima returned home from school to find her mother's friends, Cynthia and Joyce, seated in the living room, their laughter echoing through the house. Cynthia, a frequent visitor, had always been a source of curiosity for Ima. Whenever she stayed over, Azuka would insist that Cynthia share her room, leaving Ima to sleep alone in the guest room. Ima had never questioned it, but now, a seed of doubt began to grow in her mind. That night, as the house fell silent, Ima lay awake, her thoughts consumed by jealousy and suspicion. She crept out of bed, her bare feet padding softly against the cool floor, and made her way to her mother's room. The door was closed, but faint sounds seeped through the cracks, whispers, giggles, and then, something else. Ima pressed her ear to the door, her heart pounding in her chest. The sounds she heard were unmistakable, a mirror of the secret she and her mother shared. Betrayal washed over her like a cold wave. Her mother, the woman she had trusted above all others, had been sharing their sacred bond with someone else. Ima's world crumbled around her as she realized that she was not the only one who held a place in Azuka's heart. The love she had believed was hers alone had been given to another, and the pain of that revelation cut deeper than any knife. In that moment, Ima made a silent vow. She would no longer be bound by her mother's lies, her manipulations, or her twisted desires. She would find her own path, one that led away from the darkness that had consumed her life. But as she turned away from the door, a part of her wondered if she would ever truly be free. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily on Ima's chest as she lay in bed that night, her mind racing with thoughts of her mother's deceit. The image of Azuka with Cynthia and Joyce played over and over in her mind, each repetition fueling the fire of her anger. "My mother is not to be trusted," Ima whispered to herself, her voice trembling with a mix of hurt and fury. "After filling my head with lies, telling me I'm her first and only love, look at what she's doing. No wonder Cynthia and Joyce have been visiting so often. It's all a game to her. Ima clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms as she made a silent vow. It's just a matter of time. Once I get into the university, I'll form my own clique, my own circle. My mother will never have the chance to touch me again. I'll make her long for me, make her beg for my forgiveness. She'll regret ever betraying me. But as the hours passed, Ima's resolve hardened. She decided she wouldn't wait until university to exact her revenge. No, she would start now. Her mother had planted the seeds of darkness in her, and now it was time to let them grow. Ima's mind began to churn with plans, each one more calculated than the last. She would make Azuka pay for the lies, the manipulation, and the twisted love she had forced upon her daughter. Over time, Ima introduced her two closest friends, Janet and Prisa, to the secret world she had shared with her mother. At first, they were hesitant, but curiosity and the allure of the forbidden drew them in. Soon, the three girls were indulging in the same activities Ima had once shared with Azuka. What began as a way to cope with her anger and betrayal became a regular ritual, one they all grew to crave. Each time Azuka went on one of her frequent vacations with Cynthia and Joyce, Ima and her friends would lock themselves in her room, losing themselves in their shared secrets. As the years passed, Ima's life became a balancing act. On the surface, she was the model student, bright, ambitious, and disciplined. She maintained her position as one of the top students in her class, excelling in academics and representing her school in numerous competitions, often returning with grand prizes. But beneath the facade of success lay a darker reality, one filled with forbidden desires and a growing detachment from the world around her. Despite her achievements, Ima's mother never praised her. Instead, Azuka would dismiss her accomplishments, urging her to focus less on school and more on learning domestic skills. "What use is all this education?" Azuka would say, her voice laced with disdain. "You don't need a university to be successful. Stay close to home, where you belong." But Ima knew the truth. Her mother's words were not born of concern but of fear. Fear that once Ima entered university, she would see through the lies and break free from Azuka's control. As Ima prepared for her final year in secondary school, the pressure mounted. The upcoming WAEC and JAM examinations loomed large, and with them, the promise of a new beginning. Ima was determined to excel, not just for herself but as a way to finally escape her mother's grasp. She dreamed of the day she would leave for university, leaving Azuka and her twisted world behind. But fate had other plans. One evening, Ima and her friends decided to stay late at school to study. The campus was quiet, the air thick with the scent of blooming flowers and the faint hum of crickets. After hours of poring over their books, Janet suggested they take a break. "Let's go behind the school building," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "We haven't done it in a while, and I've missed it so much. Just a quick one to ease the stress, then we can go back to studying." Ima hesitated. "I think we should focus on our studies," she said, her voice firm. "My mother is traveling tomorrow. You guys can come over then, and we'll have all the time we need." But Janet and Prisa insisted, their persistence wearing Ima down. Reluctantly, she agreed, and the three girls made their way to the secluded spot behind the school building. They had barely begun when a shadow fell over them. Ima's heart stopped as she looked up to see Mr. Kinsley, their mathematics teacher, standing there, his expression a mix of shock and disapproval. "What is this nonsense?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the night like a whip. "What do you think you're doing?" Ima and her friends froze, their faces pale with fear. "We're sorry, sir," Ima stammered, her voice trembling. "Please, don't report us to the principal. It won't happen again." Mr. Kinsley's eyes narrowed as he studied them, his gaze lingering on Ima. "I'm highly disappointed in you," he said, his voice cold. "Especially you, Ima. I thought you were well brought up, but it seems you're just a wolf in sheep's clothing." Ima's stomach churned as she pleaded with him, her voice desperate. "Please, sir, we're sorry. We promise it won't happen again." Mr. Kinsley crossed his arms, his expression unyielding. "If you want me to keep this quiet, you'll do as I say. Ima, since you're their leader, you'll be the one to bear the consequences." Come to my house tomorrow at 6 p.m. I have a lot of household chores for you to do. If you perform them to my satisfaction, I'll keep this between us." Imma nodded, her heart pounding. "Thank you, sir. I'll do anything you ask." The next evening, Imma arrived at Mr. Kinsley's house, her stomach in knots. She had lied to her mother, telling her she was going to school to study. As she stepped inside, she found Mr. Kinsley seated on the couch, dressed in a white singlet and boxers, a book in his hands. He gestured for her to follow him into the bedroom, where he pointed to a heap of clothes on the floor. "Start with these," he said, his tone casual. Imma bent down to gather the clothes, her hands trembling. But before she could begin, Mr. Kinsley's hands were on her, his touch invasive and unwelcome. Imma froze, her mind racing as she tried to process what was happening. "Sir, is this why you called me here?" she asked, her voice shaking. "No wonder my mother warned me about men." Mr. Kinsley smirked, his grip tightening. "Oh, so that's why you started doing it with your friends, ABI? Don't you know it's a sin for women to engage in such activities? You let your mother brainwash you. But here's the deal. You give me what I want, or I'll expose you. And you know what that means. Your scholarship will be revoked, and you'll become a laughingstock, not just in school but in the media." Imma's heart sank as she realized the gravity of her situation. "Sir, please, I can't do this," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "I'll do anything else, but not this." But Mr. Kinsley was relentless. He pushed her onto the bed, his strength overpowering her resistance. When it was over, Imma felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness, anger, and an unexpected sense of satisfaction. For the first time, she realized that the connection she had shared with her mother and her friends paled in comparison to what she had just experienced. A part of her wondered if her mother had been wrong all along. As she left Mr. Kinsley's house that night, Imma's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: her life would never be the same.